So, welcome to the fifth edition of Everyone Gets a Job. The idea of these sessions is to promote the economic sectors that are growing in the region and in the town, and particularly in the town of Hamden. So, to date, we've done one on healthcare, on STEM, including a presentation on the town's new STEM academy. We've done manufacturing, and we've done the trades, plumbing, heating, HVAC, and all of the other construction trades. And we've got a variety of people. It's been really fun to do these. Rob is the video person who has produced these videos. We have four for the four that we've done. And after tonight, if you're not on my mailing list already, I will send you links to all four sessions that you can watch, go back and watch. It's the same format. Excuse me. We've been in this room and then in a room behind the library at the Miller Senior Center. So again, welcome to come tonight. And what I'd like to do is not spend a lot of time talking about the speakers, to just let them speak. But the idea here is for you and the young people here to hear about different careers, what the earning potential is, and what some of the educational requirements are. So the format is for each of the speakers to take 15 minutes to present the information about what they do. And then we'll have a Q&A, and then at the end, we'll leave about 20 minutes or so for you to come and individually talk to them if you'd like to do that. Okay, we have to be out of the room by 8 o'clock, so, it's a pretty tight schedule by the time we're done. So, I'm going to just go, I'm going to start on the far end with Joe. I've known Joe a long time. Joe has many roles. He's going to talk about recycling in his business, Urban Miners, and then we'll go to the next speaker.
Okay, so I guess the point is to look at jobs. So I'll just start quickly. What I do very briefly is I've been promoting for about 10 years to recover buildings and take them apart by hand instead of demolishing them. And also sort of an expansion of that is we do salvage work. For example, the Peabody Museum just called us the other day and they're doing a restoration. So they have a lot of cabinets that they want to salvage. So we do entire buildings, barns, sometimes commercial salvage, and that kind of thing. In terms of the industry of deconstructing buildings, it's pretty new and still developing in Connecticut. Other parts of the country have a lot more jobs that have been established for a period of time. So I don't have a lot of time, so I'll quickly go through the types of jobs in this deconstruction industry. And the first one would be site work, which is you actually, it's just like a construction site, only in reverse. So you have construction site supervisors, you have construction managers, and you have laborers. Trained a little bit differently, but basically you're doing the same thing as someone building a house, except you're unbuilding it. The main difference is you're also handling materials, because that's the whole point of a deconstruction. So that creates other jobs. When you take buildings apart, you also then have to retail and warehouse the materials, and you also have to transport them. So that's a whole other set of jobs, which is retail, warehouse, and transportation. And then another set of jobs that come from the materials is manufacturing. There's, in the last 10 years, a lot of small businesses have developed that make furniture, remill beams into flooring, artwork, paneling, which those materials then lead to another set of jobs, which is using those materials and installing them. So one of the big things that's been happening in the last few years for me is we take the materials, we make tabletops out of them, and then the tabletops go into a restaurant, and then we end up putting the bar in and maybe a wall. So there's installation work for carpenters and as well. All of these jobs are very similar to other jobs. The main difference is the materials are harvested locally, and the products are manufactured locally out of those materials. For example, and I said Connecticut we're still really the only person that's been doing deconstruction is me, with some exceptions, but that's going to change. I went online, and just to give you a very simple example, there's a construction manager, which is actually a deconstruction manager in this case, for Habitat, and they have a salary range of $44,000 to $97,000 with an average of $64,000. Now that's in other parts of the country because Habitat in Connecticut does not do deconstruction, but in many other states, for example, the Carolinas, they do. There's also basic deconstruction workers, and I think the pay on this one is 23 to 34,000. So that's more of an entry-level job, which is, deconstruction is a good place for entry-level jobs because there's a lot of basic straight-ahead labor, loading trucks, taking nails out of boards, and it's a way to get in the door and work your way up. Is that 10 minutes? Okay. We're only questions at the end, or? So, okay. Let's see. What would be a next good point after those jobs? So I'll give you some examples. We have, over the last 10 years, we went from having 0 materials reuse stores, and I think now there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 11. Habitat has probably about 5 or 6. There's the Reconstruction Center in Newington. There's New England Reuse in North Haven. And then we also have a place in New Haven called Restoration Lumber, and they mill salvaged beams from factories into flooring, and they sell that flooring product. I work with a nonprofit in Springfield, Mass, because they're very big and well organized, and they can take large volumes of materials. So what they do is the owner of a property will pay us to deconstruct it, and then the nonprofit will come down with their truck and just pick all the material up, bring it to their store, and sell it. And the owner then gets a tax deduction, and that helps pay for the removal process. So we now have a good transportation system. They do a loop from Springfield and come through Connecticut, sometimes pick up 2 or 3 loads at once. Not only in full deconstructions, but sometimes when contractors are doing a renovation, there might just be a set of cabinets or whatever, and they'll just come and pick those up as well. So this is a way to not only create jobs, the environmental benefit is all of that material stays out of the dumpsters. There's another very large facility in Windsor, and he's now in Springfield and New York City, and he also buys wholesale barn materials, because a lot of barns come down in Connecticut, and he remills it into flooring. So all of these things are, each one of these steps creates jobs, eliminates waste, and the manufacturing adds another level of jobs, and we get a lot of unique Connecticut materials that are reinstalled either locally or just Saturday, we removed, for example, we removed all the flooring from a house in Greenwich, and my customer is renovating a house in Virginia, and that's about the same age, so she took all that flooring down to Virginia to reinstall it because it matched what she had. So in theory, Connecticut, which we demolish about 3,000 buildings a year, we could take that material, manufacture it, remanufacture it, or sell it as it is and export it, because we have so much good material here that you can't find in other parts of the country. For example, we're starting a 1749 house, and they don't have a lot of 1749 houses out west, I could tell you that. So sometimes I sell flooring to folks in Colorado, West Coast, et cetera. So this is sort of an overview of the deconstruction process and the materials, most importantly, the materials we get from it.
Any infomercial you want to do as a recycling coordinator for the town?
Oh, can we do that? I got 2 minutes? Okay. So, well, I'm not tearing down plaster, which if I look like heck right now is because I was tearing down plaster ceilings today. I do work part-time for the town of Hamden now as a recycling coordinator, technically the solid waste and recycling coordinator. And on the municipal level, of course, we have our regular trash and recycling. We also have the, for example, we're working on Earth Day, which is coming up April 27th, which is, I see as an important educational opportunity. What else? Well, let's say, what am I, about 5 weeks into the job now? So, yeah, still learning the paperwork trail, shall we say.
All right. So before I introduce the next speaker, so I've known Joe a long time, but one of the things I worked on, if you all remember the Newhall remediation project that was going on over the last several years in Hamden, one of the byproducts of that was that we had to tear down some buildings that were unstable because they were on unstable earth. So it bothered me one night at 3 o'clock in the morning that we were paying somebody, you know, with a backhoe, one person with a backhoe to take down a house, like somebody's whole life or family's history, like in 5 hours, that house is gone. And it was really expensive, so the long and short of it was, Joe and I developed a program through Gateway Community College, a certificate program to train unemployed people in the area of deconstruction. And we ended up, they ended up taking an 11 or 13-week course, all the OSHA stuff, and we ended up paying them a livable wage for, I think, 8 weeks. And Joe ended up hiring a few of them for, you know, a number of years while he had work. And it was really great. It's all about, you know, it's about jobs and employment, but it's also about the sustainability of our community. And if that's not sustainability, reusing a building instead of throwing it in a landfill, I don't know what is. Now, when you drive around Hamden, you know, occasionally you drive by a building that's boarded up. It's ugly, and you wonder, you drive by it and you go, what is going on with that building, you know? It could appear to be contaminated, or it's just blighted, broken windows. There's usually a story associated. There's always a story with that building, right, Dan? So the next topic we're going to discuss is the topic of environmental science and brownfields. Dan is a licensed environmental professional. One time I took some college students on a tour of all these abandoned buildings in Hamden, and at the end of the tour I asked them what they thought, and they said, we think we're going to go into environmental consulting, because they saw a lot of money to be made. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan from Fuss & O'Neill, and he'll talk about what he does.
Well, thank you. So I'm Dan Janey. As Dale mentioned, I'm the Environment Department Manager for Fuss & O'Neill. And just on my background, I have a Bachelor of Science degree in geology and about 26 years of experience in the field. And kind of what drew me to this discipline was really a strong interest when I was young in applied science, a real desire to work outside, and a real desire to work on different projects in different places. And that's a lot of what the Environment Department does, is we're constantly at different places. So a little background on the company. Fuss & O'Neill is a multidiscipline engineering firm. And so, you know, what does that really mean? So it means we have a lot of diversity in our specialties, and it relates to brownfields. We do transportation, so roads, lighting, signage, signals. We do water, clean water, water supply. We do wastewater, stormwater, site engineering, so laying out a site, figuring out how to integrate the site with its surrounding environment, utilities and such. We have engineers that do mechanical, electrical, plumbing, so retrofit of buildings. And then we have structural engineers who actually figure out, you know, how to set up buildings, how to set up bridges and other kind of infrastructure. And then what I do is the environment. So we assess and remediate polluted soil and groundwater. We abate hazardous building materials as part of deconstruction activities. We also have professionals that sort of look at the assessment and mitigation of flora and fauna, or the non-technical term, the bugs and bunnies, in terms of how impacts will occur from projects on the environment. So what do we actually do for all these disciplines? Well, first we design, so we figure out what needs to be put in place, and also create the documents that a contractor or those who will actually build it need to use in order to figure out how to build it. We do permitting, so each process, local, state, federal, has a regulatory process, so we'll fill the permit applications out, and we'll kind of shepherd those applications through for our client to kind of expedite the process. And then we'll oversee and administer the project. So we'll go out and monitor the construction and document that, what's being built. So in terms of what I do every day, the environmental field, relative to polluted soil and groundwater, the process can start in a couple ways. It can start in a conventional way that you would think about, an accident, some kind of emergency, some sort of release of pollutants happens, and something needs to be done about it. Or it can be a little more subtle, and the driver is sort of what we call environmental due diligence. So, for example, a buyer wants to purchase a piece of property and they need a loan from a bank. Well, a bank isn't going to be bound to an agreement unless they understand the risks they're getting into when purchasing a property. There's certain laws in the state that when a piece of property transacts requires environmental due diligence. And, more sort of what Dale mentioned, to bring that defunct factory or blighted building back to productive use, the environmental process needs to occur, and that's typically the brownfields buzzword of how that occurs. So in terms of the sequence of what happens is the first step is to go out and be kind of a detective and figure out where pollutants might have been used on the property, where they might have been released to the subsurface. So that would involve looking at records, interviewing people who might know, and actually doing a site visit. And, I maybe a little weird, but I really kind of enjoy crawling around those blighted, dark buildings because, you kind of get to see the history up front, and then you actually kind of get to see the history as you're going through the records. And, Connecticut and Northeast has just an amazing past in terms of our manufacturing legacy. So once you do that detective work and you know where the pollutants might be, you then go out and physically take the samples. And that's the appeal when I was young of, you're out in the field, you're actually collecting the samples. And you use a lot of specialized equipment to take those samples, drill rigs, different types of apparatus. Those samples go off to a laboratory, they're analyzed, you get the data back and you determine, well, how bad are the pollutant levels? So you look at the established state standards, you figure that out. It's usually an iterative process because you need to know, well, how bad is bad? What's the size, the extent of the pollutants? Typically if we go out and take 3 samples and they're all contaminated, well, you don't know what's outside those 3 samples. So you need to go back and kind of solve the puzzle as to how bad it is. And then you need to know, well, what's affected by it? So the buzzword is sensitive receptors. It could be people, is it so bad that somebody can't even touch the dirt? It could be groundwater, everybody needs to drink water. Are the water supplies polluted? It could be surface water, wetlands, habitats. That's part of the process of figuring that out. Once all that is done, then the part is, well, how do I fix it? How do I come up with a solution? And there's a big range on how that can be done. It can be as simple as you dig it up and you take it away to a permitted facility. You can chemically treat it either in the ground or dig it up and treat it out of the ground. There's an entire industry on ex situ remediation and different methods for different contaminants. And you can cap it and cover it with different means to minimize that potential that people might touch it or that rainwater will go through it. What really makes the process complicated is some of the brownfield projects where you need to do all that and you actually need to build something. And you need to build something in the time frame that all the stakeholders require. So you're doing all this detective work, all this subsurface work, but at the same time you have this driver that you have somebody that needs to build something to put something back into productive use. And it actually is very challenging, but it's also really interesting. And that's a lot of the heart of brownfields are. And, that's kind of, for our company, where those multidisciplines come into play because you're collaborating with a bunch of different professionals to kind of get a common goal done. So the types of jobs that are needed in the industry for the environmental are, geologists like myself, engineers, civil, chemical, mechanical, chemists. There's chemists that are in conventional laboratories. There's chemists that are in mobile laboratories that are actually on these sites doing, large projects. There's actually large remediation projects where there's chemists on site as part of that in situ, ex situ remedial work that I mentioned. Land surveyors, pretty much every facet of our disciplines need a survey of some sort at one time or another. Geographic information system and AutoCAD professionals, so basically computer specialists who understand and can manipulate data. So that a lot of what I do is very data intensive. It generates a lot of data. It needs to be managed. It needs to be presented. There's graphical outputs. And then a whole range of technical professionals are needed. People who run that sampling equipment, drillers in the industry. A lot of the sampling equipment that I mentioned is specialized in terms of people who operate it and actually people who fix it. We're actually finding lately it's becoming very difficult to get some of our equipment fixed because a lot of those companies are just in Connecticut, Northeast, are actually moving out. So we've had some challenges with that. And then on the construction side, there's a lot of active treatment systems that basically require a lot of people with mechanical knowledge. And you can imagine the pumps that pump the groundwater out of the ground. They send it into a treatment shed. There's a whole treatment train that occurs. So you need people that are very mechanically savvy and can think on their feet to fix these things and keep them going. In terms of the training that's required, conventional four-year college degree in engineering or chemistry, geology, environmental science. We have people with associate's degrees in environmental studies and hazardous building materials science. Certainly survey, technology, and conventional survey. And then a lot of us, usually in some of the disciplines like AutoCAD and GIS aren't typically offered as part of your core curriculum. So a lot of us are going to local community college to take those classes to be proficient in it. In terms of the salary ranges, typically our entry-level people coming in the environmental field are probably starting in the mid 50,000 is a good starting salary. In 5 years, expecting maybe mid to upper 60,000. In 10 years, I would say it really depends. It depends on the person and how they progress in the organization. So on 10 years, you should be on your way to being a project manager. And if you're a good project manager in our field is probably making between $70,000 and $80,000 after 10 years. But that kind of goes to the last part I'll talk about is the skills. So what kind of skills are we looking for? For me, I'm relatively new to my position, and in the past year I've done some hiring. And what I find that I'm looking in interviews is for people who I can get a sense will never stop learning. Regardless of what age they are, regardless of what position they achieve in the company, our field is always changing. And in terms of the skill set that we need from people, we need a really diverse skill set. We need people who can write. We need people who can go out in the field and actually do hands-on work and get dirty and not be afraid to get dirty and be mechanically savvy. And one of the things we really need is people who can collaborate with one another, because on a brownfield project, the project teams typically are you go at a project level meeting and you'll literally have 10 or 12 people sitting around a table, from the architect to the project manager, the construction manager, and just being able to collaborate and coordinate with people are a real key to getting these projects done.
Thanks, Dan. Here's a pop quiz for you. So how many of you have driven by the old middle school, Michael J. Whalen? Wow. How many of you went to Michael J. Whalen? Occasionally I get people that actually did. Well, it hasn't changed much. So if you've gone by there, you see piles of dirt and you've seen buildings taken down, and there's a building on the corner of the Newhall Community Center. And how many of you have been to the new baseball field, Rochford Field? Do you play? No, okay, but you've been there. And we have Volano Park, which used to be called Mill Rock Park. Those are all brownfields. They're all brownfields done under the Newhall remediation program, which is pretty much wrapped up now. At the end of the day, that involved lead and arsenic in the soil, groundwater issues, all the things that Dan discussed, as well as serious asbestos, PCBs, in the buildings and caulking. So this field and all these buildings have a history. In the baseball field and the park, that was completely contaminated, and I was very involved in that. And I'm working with Dan in a collaboration with UConn, who actually has a brownfield program. And Gateway has a sustainability program. And the next speaker is going to talk about pretty much a brand new program at Southern, my alma mater. And I've only heard about this a couple of years ago, and I thought it would be great to have Jim talk about the program at Southern. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim Flynn.
Great. Thanks, Dale. Thanks, everybody. My name's Jim Flynn. I am a program associate with Southern Connecticut State University. I recently retired from the Regional Water Authority after 35 years in the water supply industry. For those of you who don't know, the Regional Water Authority supplies public drinking water and fire protection to roughly 500,000 people in and around Greater New Haven, town of Hamden included in that. But what I really wanted to do is just take a couple of minutes to talk about how Southern and Gateway Community College are creating the future utility workforce through a unique and exciting public utility management degree program. It's the only one of its kind in the country. Many people don't realize that there's a major challenge facing utilities nationwide, and that's an aging workforce, coupled with a shallow pool of desirable and competent workers to replace those. Nearly 50% of utility workers, and that's water, wastewater, gas, electric, telecom in some cases, are eligible to retire in the next 10 years. And that's well over 100,000 jobs, easily. And the ability to effectively manage a public utility and provide high-quality products and services in tomorrow's marketplace requires professional and technical leaders who really understand utility management principles. Utilities are businesses, but they do things just a little bit differently. If you've ever looked at your electric bill, you can understand that because you can't understand it, and no one knows how they do it. So it takes some special training. Anyway, these issues pointed to the need for developing a pool of qualified employees to assume positions in the utility sector. No one really thinks about a career in public utility management. We tend to take it for granted, and I'm speaking to the younger folks in the room. You know, you flip on a switch and the lights go on, and you flush the toilet and the water goes somewhere. What happens to it? You turn on a faucet and water comes out. No one really understands how many facets of providing these utilities and what their critical nature is, and all of the talented professionals needed to manage and sustain them. So think about it for a second, and think about water, because that's where I come from. Water is an essential life-sustaining product. You can't live without it. Your town would not survive without it. And just imagine a day without water. Delivering a safe and abundant supply of drinking water and fire protection is truly, in my opinion, a noble cause. For me, it's been really exciting and rewarding. It's different every day. But you're really helping to sustain the communities in the region that we live in for generations to come. So back in 2014, the RWA and a group of industry advisors began working alongside Gateway Community College to create an educational pathway that would result in either a certificate, an associate's, or a bachelor's degree in utility management. Again, first of its kind in the country. And the partnership really made sense. You know, part of the Connecticut State University's mission is to work with regional employers and industries to ensure that it's delivering graduates with the requisite skill sets that the industry needs. In this case, the utility partners included the RWA, the Metropolitan District, which does most of another big water, wastewater utility up in the Hartford area, United Illuminating, which is now Avangrid, Southern Connecticut Gas, Connecticut Water Company, and that's just to name a few. The Associate in Science in Public Utility Management at Gateway would allow students to go directly into the workforce upon graduation, or you could transfer those credits into the Bachelor of Science degree program at Southern. In addition, students can go right to Southern from day one for the entire program. The program is designed to align with career tracks which enable the student to gain theoretical and practical hands-on knowledge that's important for working in public utilities, as well as courses that prepare the student for advanced studies. The Bachelor of Science Pathway program at Southern provides a solid management base coupled with an industry-specific concentration that allows graduates to fill dynamic managerial roles in the public utilities. Opportunities include operations, water quality, supervisors, finance, customer relations, environmental analysts, and regulators, only to name a few. But this is really a management program. It's not necessarily a technical training program. So when you think about it from the water sector, which I can speak to, there's basically 4 areas. There's supply, treatment, distribution, and water quality, and all that goes into providing those. And then there's also all the support systems and administrative. There's customer relations, there's finance, there's accounting, there's purchasing, there's the IT guys, the GIS, that's all included. So there's a lot of opportunities. Starting entry-level salary, one might expect, is probably in the $50,000 to $70,000 range today. They're good jobs. They're jobs that are staying here. They're not going to China. The associate degree program opened this fall at Gateway with positive enrollment. I'm actually an adjunct professor there teaching in that program. And the bachelor's degree program at Southern continues to be developed and marketed. We're recruiting students now, and that'll launch in the fall of 2019. Hands-on experience will play a role in the curriculum through fieldwork, internships at various utility companies. And during these internships, students can directly apply the concepts, knowledge, and skills learned in their course of study. We're working with our industry partners in developing these internships. We're getting a commitment of support from them. Will you hire these people? Will you offer scholarships? Will you offer some kind of financial assistance? And they've been very enthusiastic across the board because we're all in the same boat. So anyway, I encourage you to explore the program further. I did bring some brochures with me. You're welcome to take on. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Anybody hear the term the gray tsunami? Most people haven't, but it's a term that a lot of people in the workforce world know about. The graying of the workforce, exactly what Jim was talking about. In every one of these panels, particularly in manufacturing, in the trades, the industry is desperate for young people to get involved. You hear the money. You hear the money's good in almost every trade that we bring out. We're not going to hype a trade that you get paid $18,000 a year, but almost all of our panels have had to discuss this issue of many, many people retiring. Electric Boat is hiring like 1,100 welders. There's not 1,100 welders in Connecticut, so where are they going to get this talent? So the trade schools are working their hardest. All these unique partnerships are being formed between Gateway and Southern, Gateway and Albertus Magnus. We haven't included them in the panels yet, but all the schools are developing collaborations to make sure that you guys, the younger people, have new ideas to think about, particularly for this one, science. I just want to say a word before we go to questions and answers. Pete Solomon was sick tonight and he couldn't come, but Pete Solomon is a science teacher at the Sound School in New Haven. Anybody here at the Sound School? Good. So it's a marine biology, aquaculture, VOTech school. It's not a magnet school. Most people think it's a magnet school, but it's a VOTech. My son Ben went there and was really interested in environmental science and marine biology. They have tremendous programs there. Pete is an excellent teacher. He was Ben's advisor and can speak very eloquently about all the careers in marine biology. So if you're interested in that and want to get in touch with Pete, get in touch with me, and I'll make sure. You have to apply an application. You have to be interviewed. It's not a lottery system. You have to show that you're really interested in marine biology. If you went to summer camps or any kind of science camper, that all helps you. So I would encourage you to visit. It's a campus environment down on the shore in New Haven. And, you know, you walk from building to building like it's a college almost, and the classes are in all different buildings. It's a really different type of environment. So I just wanted to mention that for Pete. So before we get to questions and answers, on your chair is the yellow sheet. Excuse me. And the next, the last three panels of the 8 series, the next panel is going to be on Thursday, April 18th, which is like 10 days from now. It's going to be about starting a business, entrepreneurship. Some young people want to take that path, so we have a full panel for that. Again, will be videotaped. And then coming up will be IT, which will be really interesting because I have some really, we got a couple of intense speakers on that, and we'll probably have it in this room. We don't have the date. And the final panel will be on job readiness. That's one of the things that employers always talk to us about, that young people, some are good, some are not really ready, but everybody was young once, and they, you know, they have to learn how to talk to an adult, dress properly, interview, get internships, and the final panel will be held probably towards the end of the school year. So with that, I have a bunch of questions I can ask the panelists, but let's start with you. What questions do you have? Young people, grown-ups, what do you got? All right. So what's the ugliest project, Dan, you've ever gotten involved in? Just give me like a quick synopsis. I mean, I've gone through some pretty bad buildings, and they're scary. They're dark. There's smelly stuff in them. But there is a great satisfaction in resolving. You got one?
Oh, yeah. I think the one that comes to mind is it was a defunct facility where they repaired buses, and it was about 100,000 square foot building, so a very large building. And when I went into it, it was February, and it was all made of concrete. So you would think, you know, maybe it would be a little warmer in there, but it was actually like walking into an ice box. And so it was really cold, and it was very dark. And as we were doing our drilling, so as we were figuring out where the contamination was, we would drill through the floor slab, and the drill rig, the auger that drilled into the ground would suddenly just drop like 6 feet. And we realized that there was so much void space below the floor slab because it was all made on fill. So basically, this land had been filled in historically with all kinds of polluted materials, stuff. And, you know, that's not structurally suitable to put a building on. So over the course of the 60 years this building existed, there had been all this settlement. So there's this huge void space. So we kept losing our drilling equipment through the floor. And then once we finally figured out how to deal with that, when we started to get down to the water table, we were striking all this oil. And we were literally striking pure oil.
Like the Beverly Hills.
Exactly. And which is, you know, it's kind of unusual to find straight oil, and what was more unusual is we found about an acre of it. It was a 9-acre site.
Where was this?
It was in Connecticut. And that was one of the most interesting projects I've been on in my career, because the finding of the oil, the figuring out where it was, and then ultimately figuring out how to deal with it. Which in the end was that first very basic level I talked about, was basically dig it up and get rid of it. And we were literally digging up big holes. The building was demolished, and we were digging a big hole and actually just really literally sucking the oil out with a truck into a tank. And that occurred for months. And it was very effective at remediating the oil, but it was a massive project.
So one of the things Dan said earlier in his presentation about the satisfaction of resolving problems and understanding the historical nature, when we were involved in the New Hall remediation and cleanup of all kinds of pollutants, a lot of that land was owned through time. Various pieces were owned even in the Revolutionary War. So we found in the old days the former U.S. repeating arms, which became Winchester, which became Olin. We found gun parts. It's like an archaeological dig. We found shell casings, bullets. We found a couple of big shells. We had to call the FBI because they were still live from the 1930s, 40s, 20s. So we found some interesting things. Any other questions? I got one for Jim next. Pam.
Joe, I probably watch too much HGTV, but is there a big market now for the stuff that you pull, like for design and stuff? Outside?
The question was, is there a big market for reused building materials?
It's still developing, but compared to 10 years ago, yes, and especially local small manufacturers. You may not notice it, but the next time you go into a restaurant, it's not every restaurant, but a lot of restaurants, stores. So I'll give you an example. If you go into Common Ground, which is the coffee shop right over here, that's all salvage materials, and it so happens that the shop guy that I work with, who I give my materials to, did that. And he did the one in Branford. We have a restaurant we supplied the floors and tabletops to in Newtown. We have one in Middlebury. We're doing a pizza store in New Haven, tables, bar, paneling, and maybe a coffee shop in another side of New Haven. So interestingly, we had just happened to have a restaurant that was closing in Milford. We took all the table bases and the tops, and we brought them back to the shop. And the next day, we got a job. We have to build tables for a restaurant. So we're using the same bases and making different tops out of material that came from Prospect. So yes, it's getting better. People have figured out that the products that you can get from local buildings are unique and interesting, and it happens to be in style now. Everybody likes barn board and. It really depends. So if you have something exotic like chestnut barn board, that's going to be expensive. The flooring is a good example, I think, because flooring is very utilitarian, right? It's a very useful product. We take it out of the house. The cost to the customer was $2.75 a square foot. That's about what you would pay for fairly inexpensive flooring if you bought it new. Partly we can do that because it was subsidized by the owner donating it. It gets a little complicated, but we have an arrangement with the nonprofits. So the owner donates all the materials and gets a tax break, which helps to pay us. In making more efficient systems, and which is also environmentally a good thing too, instead of sending all that material, if I happen to be able to sell it to one of my customers, instead of shipping it to Springfield to my customer who's bringing it to Virginia, that wouldn't make sense, right? So she just drove by Greenwich, picked it up. So what I do is I sell it for the nonprofit. All the money goes to them because it's their flooring, and then they pay me a commission because I save them all the trouble of having to transport it and sell it in their store. So I'm like their salesman. A lot of paperwork, but in the end, it really works. So lately, I have more customers that want salvage flooring than I have salvage flooring. And that was not true in the past. I used to have to beat down, the problem with salvage flooring when I first started is nobody did it. So no one was, when they were putting flooring in their house, no one thought, hey, why don't we use reclaimed flooring here? It's better quality and it will match our existing. Nobody thought that way because nobody's ever saved it before. Yeah, but it is happening now, definitely.
I had another 3 o'clock in the morning revelation after the earthquake in Haiti, and I called Joe to say, you know what, all this stuff we throw in the landfill, we could build temporary housing wherever there's international problems, or even in our own country. There's a lot of different marketplace. One of the CEO of the Regional Water Authority is branding and is involved in a lot of things. He believes in what's called conscious capitalism. And so he's talking about water and primarily water, because he's the CEO of Larry Bingman, but water, but also it really is a way of thinking about how we not only have careers, but careers that we feel good about. And that's a little bit about what Joe was talking about, where nonprofits get a benefit and we don't put stuff in a landfill. I have a question for Jim. Could you talk a little bit more about the courses that people take in the utility program?
Sure. At Gateway, you're going to be taking, in their associate's program, part of a number of the courses that are already in their water management program. They have another, the water management program, and to make a long story short, is what people would go through. It's a short program so that they could sit to get an operator certification. So, in addition to those courses, and those are courses like, I think there's a regulatory course, there's a couple of special topics in treatment, special topics in distribution, and then they have customer relations, rates and revenues, environmental regulations, business law, and that's their associate's program. And again, you can go directly into the workforce, or you can transfer those credits. All of them will be accepted by Southern. And what Southern has done is taken some of their business administration curriculum and infused into it utility-specific content, if that makes sense to you. So you're still getting this comprehensive business management coursework, curriculum, but portions of it are very specific to utility management.
So one of the things that's important to know for all parents, and any parents seeing this video, 3 months from now, is that you can get all of the education that you need, and you don't have to go into a lot of debt to get it. Whether it's Gateway at $4,000 a year, or Southern at about $20,000 or a little more than that, depending on if you live on campus or not. All the schools in the area, there's a lot of great schools. If you want to go to Yale, you want to go to Quinnipiac, that's great. But you can also get all these skills that you need with jobs that pay really good money by going to Southern and to Gateway. We tend to see that Southern students, Gateway students, and Alberta students have the highest retention rates of any schools in the region, meaning that people, young people or even older people that go back to school, once they graduate from one of those schools, they tend to stick around. And that's what's important for parents to know, taxpayers to know, that we want to make sure that there's economic stability in the town, and that means you in 12 years hopefully buy a house and you start a family, and maybe 17 years from now for you, but but all the young people in the room, we want to see you stick around and, invest back in your community. And you've been in a couple of these, haven't you? Which ones did you go to?
I went to the STEM one, and then I went to another community one.
I think you're at healthcare too, or one of them. You did healthcare, right. So they've been to, we've had girls and boys, young women, young boys, whatever terminology you want to use. And we've had sort of a diversity of speakers. You'll see in the next panel we have even more diversity of speakers, all kinds of folks. And again, our high school is a great high school that has a lot of these programs and a lot of collaborations with Southern, Gateway. The STEM program, you graduate with a 2-year Gateway degree if you get through that. So they're doing applications right now. So with that, that ends the formal, unless anybody else has questions or any final comments. Anybody think of anything? Yes, sir.
Are the local utilities teaming up with the colleges on this program?
Yeah, that's a good question. Are the local utilities teaming up, partnering with the colleges? That's actually how it began. So the utilities recognize that we have this void that has to be filled with, this massive retirement blitz that's going to happen, and it will happen. And we went to the universities and said, listen, we need help. We need to get people trained to fill those voids because the utilities can't do it themselves. And that's the great thing about the Connecticut University system that Dale's speaking to is, they heard that there was a need, and they rose to the challenge, and they tailored their program to meet the needs of the industry. And they do that all the time. in not just in public utility management, but in a number of different areas.
Any other questions before we wrap up? But I really appreciate you coming tonight. For those of you watching, we will be posting the video on a website, which is soon to be developed over the summer. All of these, the entire series will be eventually on a website. Anybody who attends these workshops and panels will get, I'll email you all the ones that we've had to date, so you haven't really missed it. But I'm going to leave some time for you to talk directly to the folks here on the panel if you want to talk, or your kids want to talk to anybody. Otherwise, thanks very much for coming, and we'll see you at the next one on business development. Thanks.